Sorry, I forgot that the recording needed to start. Thank you, Mitchell. So my name is Heidi Gershio, and I'm the Assistant Learning Experience Designer with LSU Online and Continuing Education, and I'm joined by Mitchell.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Stollier. I'm an associate learning experience designer. I've been here since 2023 and I work with faculty members to help design, develop, and revise their online courses. Before that, I was a teacher in the K through 12 space and worked with ed tech.
Awesome. So we are part of the online design and development team, and our team basically partners closely with faculty to create high quality learning experiences. And we incorporate instructional design, user experience, and other design principles. So we also facilitate professional development offerings such as this workshop to provide support and guidance to faculty who are designing or redesigning and teaching courses for blended or online delivery. We'll both be monitoring the chat as we go through, and we'll alternate back and forth as we present. So if you have any questions, we would love to hear them in the chat. Please include everyone so that we can all see and learn. So we'll get right into the meat and potatoes. In true form, we like to discuss a little bit about what you'll leave this workshop with. So you should be able to identify an observable course outcome. By the end of this workshop, you'll just deconstruct a course outcome into measurable and specific module learning objectives, and you'll align assessments to outcomes and objectives. We'll also identify a couple of career skills that students could gain from your course, or just skills in general, technical skills of any kind. Before we get too far into the workshop, I did want to ask a couple of questions, and we want to kind of get to know who's in the room. So um, we will launch a poll in a moment, and it will allow you to let us know what role best describes you and your familiarity with course design. So I'm about to launch that poll. If you have trouble opening it, please let me know. Um, or if it's not available and does not show up to you. All right, I've launched the poll. If you guys wouldn't mind answering those two questions. One is, which best describes your current role? Awesome. Thanks so much for answering those. All right. It looks like we have most people answering, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results. All righty. So it looks like everybody here are either an instructor or faculty member. So welcome all of my fellow instructors and teachers. So so happy you guys decided to come. I have some that are somewhat familiar and others who are very familiar with the course design process. So thanks so much for letting me know who's in the room. All right. So one of the things that we like to acknowledge before we get started is that there are many factors that affect the quality of online learning experiences, and in a course, including the quality of the course, the delivery, the design, and then the content itself, the learning management system that the students are working in. So all these pieces are contributing factors. In this particular workshop, we're going to emphasize course design and not really teaching in the online course itself. So I want to emphasize that today is just mainly about like that pre-planning. So design is usually what happens when the instructor's planning and preparing, it's all before the students are enrolled in the course. And the delivery or the course content and support systems and other parts are all what happens after students log in and begin to engage with those different components. So, and along with the content and the instructor. So, now I want us to consider your course. I want us to take a minute, knowing that we're just kind of in that planning and preparing phase, and just reflect on your course. When you begin designing your course, think about who your students are. You probably thought about where they are in terms of their entry level skills and where you want them to finish. So I'd like you guys to take a couple of minutes to answer the questions on the screen. Um, and each one of these kind of helps you guys hone in on parts of the course that you want to develop into outcomes. So I'll give you guys 1 minute to just jot down a couple of things and then that like really drive your course. Um, I definitely recommend including the level of the course and then whether or not there are any skills associated with it, particular citations or styling or different things that you guys want the student to walk away with. And if you're not developing a course, maybe think about a topic that you teach others about often, or maybe a part of your job or your role, or a training or a workshop that you might want to develop. And imagine teaching that and jot down a couple of things that would drive that talk. All right, pausing for about 30 seconds now. All right, does anybody need a little extra time? So, some of the reasons why we had you do that is to help you guys focus on the intended outcomes so that we can plan and organize the course materials so students can meet those outcomes successfully. Now that you've noted a few key points about your course, we're going to focus on the concept of alignment in general. So, what is alignment? I'd like to start with an analogy using travel. Um, you don't necessarily get into your car and drive around aimlessly without a destination in mind, or go on a trip without planning. Instead, you identify where you want to go and think about where you are in relation to the destination. And then you might plan like the best route to get there, what time of day, or the traffic, what that might be like as you plan your trip. And that way, you're way more likely to be able to end up where you wanted to go when you wanted to go there, um, as quickly and efficiently as possible. So you might identify your goal and or destination if you're planning a trip. Then you determine where you are currently located and you figure out how to get there and what resources you'll need along the way. Do you need fuel, snacks, road trip games or activities, directions, a navigational app? Um, do you need a plan for traffic? All the things that you need to support your goal, maybe a couple of snacks. Um, so it's the same thing we need to do when designing our courses. Um, In this analogy, you can think of instructional materials as like the roadmap, and feedback that students receive on activities and assessments might serve a way of rerouting them. So Just to be clear, alignment is the intentional connection between course outcomes, learning objectives, assessments, activities, and the materials that you're providing students. If a course you're teaching is aligned, it means that your stated course goals and learning objectives are in harmony with the activities and assessments given to students. Course alignment does help ensure that both you and your student have accurate expectations about what will be taught in the course and what you will be assessing students on based on the stated course goals and the objectives. So alignment keeps you and the students going in the right direction. So the course outcomes are those aggregated knowledge and skills and abilities that students should be able to successfully demonstrate at the end of the course. It's like the target you're aiming for or the destination on the map. The learning objectives support the achievement of the larger course goal or outcome at the level of a particular module or topic. So they are much more specific, and we think of them as like the steps on the map, where maybe you take a road, a pit stop, or um, check in on your map. Assessments are a way we use to measure whether or not a student has achieved the outcome or is on target to achieving the outcome. So they're like pit stops and check-ins as well, only with an actual maybe person you're checking to see, am I in the right direction, going in the right direction? And activities can also provide feedback to correct errors before a consequence or a grade. And they're kind of the rerouting through feedback. Those are the pieces where you're practicing, and it allows students to experience that practice and engage in learning before being graded. The content are the instructional resources that you provide to help them achieve the stated outcomes and objectives. Consider this the roadmap in our analogy. So let's look at an example. This example is an Art 1003, and it's a foundational course in two-dimensional design, which is basically learning how to draw. For this example, I want you to put yourself in the mindset of the student. The student can expect the course outcomes to create accurate representations of something. The first few weeks, you start learning to design basic principles. You define those principles such as value, shape, contrast, and then maybe you demonstrate them by drawing circles, spheres, adding value to a sphere, maybe adding some contrasting elements. Throughout the semester, you are move into the still lifes and maybe a human form, improving the skills. Then at the end of the semester, you log into Moodle to check what the final project is going to be, and you see that you've been tasked with writing a 10-page research paper on a contemporary artist. Considering the objectives and the outcome, is that what you expected? Do you feel that the course prepared you to do this, or are you ready to do this based on these? Now, in defense of the teacher, a research paper is related to art and it absolutely could enhance the teaching of a course. I see you, Jill. Right. But when looking at the course outcomes, does it really satisfy that goal? This is an example of misalignment. So it kind of makes the course feel fragmented and ineffective. And it gives students mixed messages about what you're teaching versus what you're assessing them on. And it may cause students to spend time on what they consider meaningless activities or they perceive those as meaningless. And then finally, it could cause you to overestimate the effectiveness of the instruction. So fortunately, we have a handy tool that can help us visualize the course components and the student's journey. It's called the alignment map. Um, and we're going to share a link to this, so do not feel the need to rush and write everything on this page. We're gonna provide that to you. But this is an example of a blank course alignment map, which has the cells for you to enter all the different components and connections and provides a way to organize everything. The great thing about this tool is that it breaks down each component. It allows you to develop a plan for designing your course. Um, Mitchell is going to share a link to a course alignment map, a blank course alignment map, which looks very similar to this. It's just in a Word document form. Um, and if you'd like, you could download that and work on your alignment map as we go along. Each of our activities will actually kind of go through this. This layout does help because you can see the outcomes, the objectives, and the assessments all in one space and determine what materials are aligned and what needs to belong in which space. So it's a great way to visualize how all the components align with our course goals. Now, before I move on, if you did not want to use this, we definitely discuss examples. So we'll have strategies for clearly articulating how students should be able to follow along. And you'll have some examples that you could plug in if you want to do some active learning and work through it. So our next piece, we're going to discuss some ways to students will be able to demonstrate within the course um, some different strategies for that. And we'll discuss how we begin to break down our components, starting with course outcomes and then moving into learning objectives. All right, course outcomes. So course outcomes describe the larger course goals. That's what the students complete by the end of the course. So they're the overarching goals, and they describe how you are able to determine mastery of the knowledge, skills, or concepts with a direct line of evidence. They represent the highest level of learning, and they require students to synthesize complex skills and knowledge or concepts. And in some cases, depending on the weight and the relative importance of the goal within the course, it may span a couple of modules. To develop course outcomes, we consider what students should be able to do with what they've learned by the end of the course of the term. Typically, outcomes are aligned with the program goals as well, and they're assessed through summative exams or projects with a critical thinking element. So they shouldn't be too tied or too closely resemble the textbook course outcomes because when students reach an assessment point, you don't want them to say, that's not my textbook. I don't know how to do that. Usually, we want to connect outcomes to the student's ultimate goal, which is gainful employment, professional development, and the ability to navigate real life situations, which requires a little bit more nuance than the outcomes that are offered in most textbooks. Module learning objectives are a smaller scale. They describe discrete skills. There are subsets of course outcomes, and they serve as like building blocks to produce what's used to demonstrate the mastery of an outcome. They usually address uh, they are usually addressed through formative activities and assignments, which can be graded or ungraded. Some of those things could be activities that are just practice. These benefit from being developed before choosing instructional materials. Um, Starting with that end goal in mind allows you to ensure that your course outcomes are assessed and that they have the critical activities and then the material that are needed to support the students mastering that goal. This is what's known as backwards design. Backwards design helps to inform the content that you share with student and ensures that all the resources and activities that you have planned are appropriate for that learning objective and then for that overarching goal. So let's review a couple of key points for developing course outcomes and learning objectives. When we develop an outcome or an objective, we use student-facing language. So by the end of this course or by the end of this module, you will be able to insert action verb. So describe, explain, analyze, evaluate, create. Using action verbs creates some measurable and observable objectives and outcomes. Um, Aligning those objectives with the course outcomes and the assessments we do like we do want to keep in mind that every outcome and objective should be aligned and tied to at least one assessment. And again, just a reminder that the textbook doesn't always give the nuance that you do in your subject matter. So we try not to rely too heavily on the textbook's objectives. Instead, we'd like you to develop your own objectives to avoid frequent revisions due to textbook changes. Um, the course outcomes break down to the learning objectives and they inform how you build assessments. And we'll go over that in a little bit. But before we introduce other strategies to apply principles, let's briefly, very briefly, talk about how AI can support the development of outcomes and objectives. I feel like everyone's talking about AI, and I did want to acknowledge that that is something that you could use. When used thoughtfully, AI can be a powerful tool to support the process of developing outcomes and objectives. It has the potential to help you guys as instructors turn course descriptions into very measurable and observable objectives that directly connect to students' needs and even the course and program goals, depending on how you prompt those tools. So the key is really how AI is prompted. You have to be very specific and also you want to make sure that you provide the context, such as the course level, audience, desired skills. You think back to those like reflective questions that we asked about. Some of those notes are really good to add and include whenever you're prompting. Um, Reviewing and editing is really the most important part. I never want, I never take what's the output from AI a la carte. But it is a great place to start if you're feeling less organized or you want it to help you maybe give you some suggestions about how you might organize the content or the concepts. So done well, this process can help ensure that you have measurable learning objectives that drive meaningful activities and valid assessments. Um, so we don't have a lot of time to take a deep dive into like AI application, but if you're interested to learning more, we have a workshop, which is like a spotlight on generative AI in course development. And we also have some specific website faculty support on our website regarding AI, which I think Mitchell is sharing right now, if I'm not mistaken. So you can grab those two tools and use those, put them in your back pocket for a little bit later. I do want to pause and make sure that no one has any questions before we move on into our activities. Feel free to unmute or ask in the chat. I'm going to turn on the chat or look at the chat, I should say, and read through. All right. I don't see any questions at this time. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there. This is the meat and potato part. So I like to get into the discussion as soon as I can. So hopefully we'll be there really shortly, I promise. All right. So I want to take a look at a tool that we use before we uh, before we go to into developing the actual outcomes and objectives. Bloom's taxonomy is a framework that classifies various levels of thinking and learning. Our goal as educators is to lay a foundation of knowledge for students and help them build upon that knowledge. At the lowest level, we ask students to learn, basic facts, concepts, definitions, but then we want them to take those facts and explain them, apply them to new concepts, make relationships, and connect them to more. Um, and where your student begins in this particular taxonomic framework um, is kind of where you want them to end does depend on the level of the course you teach. So, in Art 1003, one of the course examples that's foundational. So they may begin with define or remember level. And by the end, we're asking students to apply design principles and draw two-dimensional objects. So an upper level class that includes like some prerequisites may start at the apply level with a like maybe a little pre-test before students get started and move to the very top where students are asked to produce something to construct or develop a new process for something. The words associated with each level guide you and inform the action verbs that you choose for your learning goals. And these verbs should be measurable and observable. I really wish we could change the taxonomy words because remember and understand don't necessarily work. In helping measure, it's easier to say classify, describe, and so on. But those are understand and remember tend to be pretty soft verbs. So now that we have a framework for action verbs, I want to show you guys a formula that we use to write outcomes and objectives, and then we'll evaluate a couple of examples as well, just to solidify the practice. So this formula of action verb plus noun and context equals a course outcome, and it could also equal a learning objective. Um, they're the same for writing both. Um, the biggest difference is the level of knowledge and skill and the context used. So in this point, in this particular formula that describe the components of the research process when writing a paper, that might be a module level learning objective, whereas describe the components of a research process when deconstructing a specific, maybe Mitchell would be better suited to give a chemistry example, but a chemical process, that might be a course level objective. Um, but the difference is the level of learning that you intend. So when you're writing or revising course outcomes and module learning objectives, we definitely recommend ensuring that you're using the Bloom's taxonomy as a guide and trying to use this formula to ful fulfill the full need of a learning objective or an outcome, and really to just give the student a full and transparent view of what they're learning and what they should walk away with. So when formulating these objectives, we are completing that sentence, you will be able to, and we want to have a verb that's strong and actionable. So verbs like know, appreciate, comprehend, grasp, or be aware of don't necessarily get convey a strong action. So we definitely want students to know or understand a particular concept, but the objective should be written as to how you will be able to measure. Like, as the person who's evaluating the student, how will you be able to measure a student's level of knowing or understanding? So, considering how you know what the students understand, how will they demonstrate that their appreciation? Those are the metrics that you would use to gauge the student's comprehension. So, you have to think about like how you would um, gauge that comprehension. If you couldn't see the aha moment on the student's face in the classroom, usually you see nods and there's a lot of body language involved. But in the online platform, you don't see any of that. So you really have to be super clear um, and use very actionable verbs. We're going to move into actions and examples, but using the formula, I wanted to give everybody a chance to maybe look at the course outcomes that you currently have for your course, And I'd like you to examine the verbs for the course outcomes that you have. Now, you might notice that understand or know or demonstrate knowledge are used, and that's okay. We'll take a moment to really think about your course in particular and those skills that you want students to have. Maybe the context is there, but the verb just needs to be articulated at the level um, of your course. So I want to take 1 minute to let you guys maybe look over those course outcomes and rephrase them or revise them. I'd like us to do at least one, and I'll pause. And we'd love for you to share one measurable action verb that you used in the chat um, whenever you're done or ready. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute. And if you have questions, please feel free to add those to the chat as you're doing this.
Want to address, there was a question in the chat.
Yes.
Can you show how to put career goals in the formula? So I did want to mention that when you have these kinds of things, think about the skills that are related to accomplishing that career goal, and that will help you sort of apply it to the formula. Heidi, did you want to add anything to my response?
Yes, sometimes there may be a technical process involved, and so you don't want to get too in the mud in your learning objectives, but you might want to put the skill in the course outcome at the course outcome level. If it is more nuanced and the skills can be broken down, then the objective level is probably where you want to address those. I usually like to think of it as it's almost a task related or oriented objective, but we really bring the concepts of the skills to the forefront whenever we're writing it in an objective form. Ooh, get those words out quickly.
Hi-
Um,
Heidi, can
yeah,
I,
sure.
this is the issue I have, like in terms of putting this stuff in, because I put my thing in, which my course objective is very, like they're supposed to be
Broad,
able to
right.
produce a graph, but the students don't understand why they need to produce that graph. It's so foundational for any kind of science thing and stuff. So I think you're right. As scientists, sometimes we just gloss over why we're doing this because it's like it's so integrated into our lives that
Mm-hmm.
but I, I don't know where I mean, I have like the TAs try and say that they're going, to bring examples in, like when they're teaching this stuff, say, I do this in my life, right? And that, but
Sure.
the students really just don't value what we're teaching them. And I
Sometimes,
don't know where to put that in.
yeah, sometimes take adding a little bit of the why into the objective can be helpful. Mitchell, you might have more insight into the sciences part, or even in math too. It can be really kind of cut and dry, and so it can be difficult to incorporate the concepts versus the skill. Um, Mitchell, would you like to add anything there? I did put a
No,
suggestion for this particular one, Jane. If I hope I don't know if that exactly helps, but you can see the difference um, between
sure. Yeah. And,
added
and,
content.
and pretty soon we're going to be looking at some examples too that might help
That's our
put that
next
into
thing.
context. But it's almost like in addition to the adding some context to the objectives also, you can also turn that into kind of like your elevator pitch too. I had this problem a lot when I was teaching too, because I taught maths and sciences kind of courses too. So I constantly tried to incorporate those sort of like, how is this used in your everyday life kind of thing. So tying it back to those career goals. So for example, in Heidi's example, producing graphs that create clear visual references to data collected. So it kind of like touches on the importance of like, making sure it's not misleading or the things like that. So anyway, we will go into more detail as we're going along.
Yeah, we're about to get into the a little bit of the nitty-gritty too, and so I'll give you guys a minute just to look at the verbs and really see, is that where I'm having trouble or is it the context? And a lot of times, you'd be surprised like you said, you're so in the work that you do. Sometimes it's hard to back up and remember what you didn't know um, when you entered the field. And so it's nice to, in this case, you might ask ChatGPT, what are some ways that I can formulate this, and then make sure that you're doing course level things. How would you expect students to describe things? Could you help me with context? And then I definitely recommend plugging in your program and your course outcomes when you're doing module objective queries, because otherwise it can become really muddy and they will just pull information from anywhere. So, oh, Emily, thanks for sharing. Identify rhetorical context and differentiate rhetorical situations. Excellent. I see some doubles there. Apply rhetorical appeals via original writing. All right. And adapt. I like the word adapt because it implies that higher level thinking order too. So, all right. I'm going to hand this over to Mitchell, who's going to go right into those examples in action. And hopefully, this will help some of these questions that you brought up. Thanks, guys, so much for engaging. This is what we're here for. This is my favorite part when we get into the mud.
Well, thankfully you don't have to have any wet wipes with you in this mud. This is all digital mud.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's jump into some examples and actually see what works, what doesn't, what might need a little help. So take a look at the two examples of the course outcomes that were written here for an art course. So our first one is to understand two-dimensional art in various mediums. Second one is to apply basic design principles to draw accurate representations of form in a two-dimensional format. So, which of these two examples would you say is written in a way that's measurable or observable? Go ahead and type in the chat, just one or two. Which one would you say is more measurable or observable?
I see Emily's voted two, Jane two as well. Very nice.
Okay, looks like two is our general consensus here. Heidi?
And you're right.
Yeah,
We
the
agree.
use of a measurable verb create in option two allows an instructor to observe whether the students achieve the objectives at an acceptable level. It includes that specific context that students should use a two-dimensional format within their representation. This option also conveys some context around the assignment. So the assignment would be well suited to a visual composition, as you can't really create something in an essay or a multiple choice question. It could be a portrait or a collection of portraits that's within a portfolio or even like in a digital format. Let's look at our next example. All right, so take a moment to read over both of those options to yourself, and then let me know in the chat which one you think is measurable and observable. All right, we're gonna give y'all just a little bit. I know sometimes.
We'll take a second. Very nice.
All right, seems like we're trending towards one. Heidi, if you'll do the
Mhm.
honors, please. All right, so yeah, one here is correct. So think about that word right here. Right rather than no describes the expectation for the student and implies what the assessment could be. So a structured writing assignment or various written works. The context provides specific methods that students use to achieve that outcome. Another phrasing that you might use is develop written works using context to support arguments or research findings. All right, so those are course outcomes. Let's look at an example of some module learning objectives. All right, so remember, learning objectives should describe discrete module level skills and knowledge that students achieve that build towards the course outcome. So the LOs are associated with the course outcome. If you don't mind showing the CO, please, Heidi.
Mhm.
Apply basic design principles to draw accurate representations of form in a two-dimensional format. So now looking at the two of these, which one is being shown in a way that is measurable and observable? right, give you another moment to look it over. All right, we have some agreement here saying that it's 2. Heidi, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
All right, so 2 is correct here. So yeah, once again, we have kind of that soft verb in one, the word no. Like the way I kind of answer that question to myself is like, well, how do I know that they know it? Or same thing with like understand. How do I know that they understand it? And then when I answer that question, or a faculty member that I'm working with answers that question, it's like, well, okay, how they know that that's how we find that verb. So in this case, define as observable and measurable. So, does this objective provide enough context for the student? Do you think the learning objective contributes and builds towards the course outcome? So, let's look at that. So, the learning objective was define the basic principles of design. The course outcome is apply basic design principles to draw accurate representations of form. So, what are y'all's thoughts? Do y'all feel like this learning objective contributes towards that course outcome?
You can do a thumbs up if we agree, or thumbs down if you don't. Yes. Yep. You have
I
to
think Emily
define
has a
and
good. Oh, go
understand.
ahead.
Sorry, Emily is saying, yeah, you have to define and understand before you can apply. So
Kind of like
good.
you have to know how to walk before you run, right? So, knowing that is definitely knowing those basic principles of design allow you to then later apply it. So, obviously, that's not the end all be all. The way that may just be one of many modular learning objectives that ultimately build up to the achievement of that course outcome. So, you want to recognize that objectives leave room for a variety of assessments, and that the objective builds towards applying the skill. You could enhance it by adding the form in which defining takes place, such as in a composition, in a drawing, but it could be a quiz on the design principles as well. All right. So, with that in mind, now it's time to write our own objectives.
Oops, I had one more.
Oh, yeah, we do have one more, don't
I
we?
have one more example. Let me back up. I showed you the answer. I'm sorry.
Just pretend you didn't see that.
Pretend you didn't see it twice as I scrambled.
Heidi.
I know, I've ruined it.
Killing me.
We'll just talk about why it's that way.
All right,
Sorry,
so let's
Mitchell.
let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this one. This one's kind of a bit of a test, even though you might have seen the answer. Let's talk about it a little bit. So, in addition to measurable verbs, we want to consider how those measurable verbs are being used. Because, like, look at both of those. So, the first one says revise a written work, and the other one says identify and correct structural, grammatical, and style issues. So, which one of these do you think is the clearer evaluation of the skills achieved? One or two? This would be a good application for that little Men in Black thing where you put the little light up and it makes you forget what happened like 3 seconds ago.
Yes, a zapper.
Yes, unfortunately.
I'm sorry. I've given away. I've spoiled the. I did a spoiler.
Yeah, but both of them
Hmm.
use measurable verbs. It's very tempting to say, yeah, it's both. However, when you think about it, option one makes that objective clear, measurable, and focused around one single observable action. So in this case, it's revise. And kind of like Jane said, it's clearly part of the assessment. One thing that I would consider is that when you're looking at the second one, it's identifying correct structural, grammatical, and stylistic issues. Sure, those two things are kind of related to each other, but because you have two verbs there, identify and correct, it kind of makes the measurement of those two kind of muddy, right? So, like, you want to consider, Heidi, if you don't mind clicking one more time, a
Yes,
couple
sorry.
times. That's okay. You want to ask
Ooh.
yourself which one allows for a clear evaluation of the skills achieved. And in this particular case, I would answer the question, well, you know, if a student's able to identify it but not correct the issue, have they fully met the learning objective? So in that particular case, that might be a case where you actually split it up into two different learning objectives and add that context there as well. So yeah, thank you all for participating in this. Let's move on to the next slide.
Perfect.
Okay, so now with all this in mind, let's begin to write our own objectives down. We'll pause and give you time to break apart at least one of the course outcomes into one or more objectives. So I'm going to go ahead and go off the mic. This is your chance to use this formula to help create your learning objective. We'll give you just a couple minutes. Okay, give you just another minute.
Wave your hands if you need more time.
Okay, does anybody need more time?
All right.
Would
Well,
love to go ahead, Heidi.
I was gonna say before we move on, I know I feel like somebody dropped off. Did we miss somebody's question? Oh, no. Okay. Sorry.
Nope,
I
we're
see
good.
the person now. Okay.
We're good. We're good. And thank you, Jane, for sharing one of yours.
Thanks. There we go.
If you had trouble making one, I would also love to hear what challenges you might have encountered, and this would help us sort of problem solve together. Practice analyzing text and identifying appeals and situations in action to find rhetorical appeals, situations, and contexts.
Mm.
I think that's definitely a good start. I would almost consider clarifying that second bullet point to be more specific to say like analyze text and identifying appeals in situations and in action.
I
Because like
might
to me, because
separate
that'll
those.
actually kind of like sharpen it up a little bit. Heidi, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was gonna say I might separate those if unless they're like a two-part process, in which case sometimes you can go with the higher
Mhm.
order of that item. So if analyzing the text is the highest order, you may start in a separate model with identifying those things. Mhm.
Yeah, very very similar feedback for the one Fermine put. as well. I'm always a proponent of, when possible, trying to like either stick with the higher order one that they're ultimately going to demonstrate, or to split them up into two as appropriate, just to kind of make the measurement of that a little clearer. I know sometimes that's kind of easier said than done. So your mileage does vary on it.
Mhm.
Thank y'all so much for your input. Let's move on to the next slide.
Clickety clack. All right.
Okay, so we developed some new objectives for our ART 1003 example here. If you don't mind clicking for us.
Yeah. Sorry.
All right, so take a look at these. Both of these objectives use measurable verbs, discuss and arrange, and both include context and, depending on the materials and activities, can contribute to students' knowledge of two-dimensional design. However, consider this particular outcome and what we're asking students to create. Of those two objectives, which one would align to this outcome in a more observable way? So I'm going to say one or two. Let me know which one you think is more aligned here in an observable way.
I'm seeing some ones.
It looks like we all have a consensus on one. Heidi, if you don't mind showing us the answer, please.
We agree.
All right, so if you chose option one, this option describes the context and skills that are needed to observe the course outcome more clearly than option two. The medium, the drawing in option one provides a direct line of evidence that the student will demonstrate their skill or ability to create an accurate representation for you that you can then evaluate as the instructor for the course. We'd like to point out that the discussion in option two is measurable, but it might be better aligned to a different course outcome that might be in this course. Also, that action arrange can be assessed in a variety of ways. So, for example, it could be digital, it could be different media, different type of media. And we'll discuss assessments after we take a look at where to align core outcomes in a course alignment map. So let's move on to the next slide. So once again, we have our example here. So alignment map. So here we filled in the available components in the blank course alignment map using our ART 1003 example. We have our course outcome at the top. We have our module learning objectives in the middle here. And so now what we need to do is we need to actually state the alignment between the course outcome and the learning objectives. Go ahead and click, please, Heidi. So in this case, we can align course outcome one to both learning objectives because the module is an introduction to two-dimensional drawing. So we can expect to cover basic terminology and the basic concepts of design. We have two remaining components in the alignment map to cover, the assessments and instructional materials. Before we discuss assessments and how they fit into alignment, though, I'd like to pause and see if anybody has any questions. If you don't have any questions right now, but you realize as we're moving on that you do, don't hesitate to just put those questions into the chat, and Heidi or myself will be able to address them for sure. All right, let's move on to talk about activities and assessments. So assessments are a key component to a course, play a role in the student's learning journey. So assessments allow you to measure student achievement and mastery of the course outcomes. On this slide, you see a few key questions to consider when when designing
Been
assessments.
there.
So the verbs that you use in your course outcomes and objectives will guide the types of assessments that you use in your course. For example, in the examples that we had earlier, each one we connected the verbs to show how students demonstrate what they're learning. So like, let's go back to that example earlier where I said those soft verbs, know and understand. Well, how do we know? How do we know that they understand it? So answering that question helps sort of reveal what type of assessment you might be having the students do. So in that last example, option 2 had 2 different action verbs. So you might separate those 2 verbs like we were talking about to create 2 objectives and 2 assessment points with separate activities that determine mastery over multiple modules. So you would want to consider an assessment strategy for students to demonstrate each of those. When choosing the verbs, you have to consider your assessment strategy very carefully. This method helps pinpoint where a student needs additional instruction or guidance to improve student outcomes. So, to kind of talk through this a little bit more, can you really describe something if you are answering questions in a multiple choice or true false format? And if you think about what it means to describe something, students would have to actually put the information using their own words in order to describe it. However, we understand sometimes there might be times where if you have a large student load, you might need to change the nature of your assessments. In those particular cases, you would shift your learning objectives to address that. So maybe instead of describing something in a multiple choice context, they're identifying, matching, classifying, labeling, maybe even interpreting too, depending on the nature of the types of questions that they're doing. Because remember, just because it's a multiple choice question doesn't mean it's low rigor. It's just a different way that you describe the skill that the students are ultimately demonstrating. So if you do have something that uses something like explaining, describing, evaluating, those might be more open-ended, and give students an opportunity to kind of like address that skill in a higher ordered manner. You'll also want to scaffold your assessments, which Heidi mentioned a little bit earlier. So thinking about back to that Bloom's framework, for the English example course, we weren't going to ask students to compose essays using citations until we know that the students know what the citation rules are. You wouldn't want to hold them accountable for doing APA format, citations if they haven't yet learned the components of APA format. They'd have to, similarly, they'd have to be able to identify errors in grammar, citation, and formatting in order to acquire their own writing skills. So in the next few slides, we're going to discuss 2 types of assessments: formative assessments and summative assessments. All right, so first off, formative assessments. So these are the ones where the goal is to monitor student learning and provide ongoing feedback that can be used to improve their teaching and by students to improve their learning. So specifically speaking, the formative assessments help students identify their strengths and weaknesses and target areas that they need to work on, and help faculty members recognize where students are struggling so that they can provide solutions to those problems as soon as possible. Formative assessments are generally considered low stakes, which means that they have either a low point value or even no point value in some way. So like one example that I think of maybe is like in a course, maybe you require students to take a practice quiz that's automatically graded before they take a graded quiz, so that they get a chance to get that feedback. Other feedback opportunities, they can take various forms, concept maps, brief summaries, research proposals for early feedback from you, interactive lesson activities, things that have a few auto-graded question types can be really helpful to give students like timely feedback that they can use. They help sort of like provide that guidance and bridge the knowledge gaps that students might have. When designing assessments, you also want to consider the timing. So just earlier, I was talking about how auto-graded assessments offer immediate feedback. You might use essay and discussion type questions as formative feedback, as formative assessments as well, but you want to consider the turnaround time so that students can benefit from that feedback. So let's think back to that map, travel analogy that Heidi was talking about earlier. When we think about formative assessments, those are like your map check, where we reroute if we make a navigational error. Did we get off at the wrong exit? Well, that's okay. Let's get back on the interstate and in the opposite direction. So that feedback provides needed information to help you get back on track. So the graphic to the right here aids in determining which assessment's well suited for each level of Bloom's taxonomy. So we'll share the link to the infographic we've used in the chat so you can keep it handy when you complete your alignment map. All right, so let's go ahead and just click real quick, Heidi.
Sorry, getting there.
That's okay.
Oh, clicking and sharing at the same time. Not my,
that's all good.
best.
We'd love to hear about one formative assessment you use in your course and how it helps measure student progress. You can add it in the chat here. Bloom's taxonomy, to answer your question, Fermine, Bloom's taxonomy is kind of like the commonly accepted one. I'll say that that's just one of many frameworks. I'm actually not personally familiar with Fink's taxonomy, so that's one I'm going to look up later. But really the big thing is considering the academic rigor and the measurability of those verbs is really the important thing. Okay, so journal entries, kind of like a quick pass-fail. Sure, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you for the response.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
I learned something new every day. I had no idea there was.
I'm
sure there were other
taxonomies, but I couldn't learn about
it.
We also I do want to acknowledge that like Bloom's also has like a more updated version, which includes like a metacognitive level, which I just looked at this Finks and it does look like it kind of has some dimensions there that layer. And so if you're interested in seeing like Bloom's taxonomy with that, you could look at the metacognitive one as well. This does kind of have some application in Bloom's, but really I guess what we try to drive home in this particular workshop is that Bloom's taxonomy offers a way to and a list of actionable verbs that you use to develop the outcomes and the objectives. So really I see where the application could be used to begin to add context to those objectives and outcomes within Finks, but really our driving force here is to make sure that they're actually measurable with an action verb rather than a knowledge or a know something or care about or use this. Our objective here is to move away from soft verbs that may not be able to measure appropriately. Sorry to go too far in there if I went down the nerd hole.
That's okay. That's okay. So yeah, I see some good examples here, including like the opportunities for students to journal about their progress. I also see like homework examples, basically a chance to sort of like, a chance to demonstrate like, how are they doing? Are they learning from it? So activities that we talk about also fall under formative assessments. So activities are like the experiences that students engage in that prepare them to achieve the intended outcomes. So that includes like interactive content activities, assessments. They could be graded or ungraded too. So like that can include things like forums, group projects, virtual tours, and more. You can use interactive activities like even in Moodle. So like H5P type activities as well to enhance engagement and get that automated feedback. Thanks so much for sharing. Let's move on to talk about summative assessments.
Sorry, I'm nerding out in the chat. All right, summative assessment.
All right, so unlike formative assessments, which are the in-process learning throughout the course, summative assessments focus on the outcome of the entire course or the program that you're in. So summative assessments are meant to compare the student's knowledge at the end of the course to a benchmark set by the course outcome. So the course's final exam, projects, portfolios, research paper assignments assess the student in a way that aligns to your stated course outcome. So remember, formative assessments were like your checkpoints along the way. Are we going in the right direction? The summative assessments are a destination in our analogy, so our endpoint. You can also design your final project or portfolio to be useful by your students in job interviews or career advancement. So you can build in milestones and checkpoints throughout the course to help students develop the necessary knowledge, skills, and acquisition. So, those KSAs to be able to handle summative assessments successfully. And even though it isn't an assessment, having an end of course reflection on the career skills that students gained is also very helpful. So let's talk about how to plug this into our alignment map. All right, so back to our example here earlier, we've covered a lot of ground. So here we've mapped out where the assessment for ART 1003 fits into the alignment map. So let's consider the map. What do you notice about the components entered so far? Is there anything missing? Tell me what you notice in the chat or in or over the microphone.
It's not a trick question. I know we did a trick question earlier, so no one's trusting us now.
Okay, so Emily noted, yeah, we're missing formative assessments here. Where's the opportunity for students to kind of check their progress in being able to define basic principles of design or demonstrate basic principles? What about that summative assessment? Any thoughts about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Does it match
Does
the
it match?
outcome?
Does it? Okay, so let's go back and look at the course outcome. Creates accurate representation of form in a two-dimensional format, but writing a 10-page research paper on a contemporary artist. This is one of my personal favorite examples to always share is like, I always use a public speaking example myself where I might say like, okay, if one of the course outcomes is to be able to deliver a speech, if they write something about a popular public speaker, well, that's not aligned. So yeah, they would probably have to create something that demonstrates that they're able to create, defining the basic principles helps them learn the terminology. Demonstrating the basic principles helps them kind of like learn those sort of step-by-step things. Ultimately, creating something goes back to that course outcome. That's right. Maybe if this was like an art appreciation kind of course, that might be that might be appropriate for it. So you want to think about the level of the course, the topic of the course outcomes when you're thinking of those activities and assessments. This really helps you kind of think through also not just, the alignment really helps too when you sort of answer those workload questions. If you have students think like, okay, why I think it's great that students learn how to do this, this, and this, but then it kind of helps you be focused too, and you're not like adding so much to the course that it's overloading the students as well. Right. Yeah, I agree, Jane. Grading this is very extensive without assessing those goals either, especially if it's early on in the course. It just doesn't seem appropriate. So, yeah, as you can see, think back to that Bloom's framework and think about how you'd want to examine the strategies. We've kind of talked through some of those examples already, but they can also be in a variety of formats too. It doesn't have to just be one type of submission. It might be a portfolio that they do. So, all right. So now I'm going to, all right. So let's go back to look at Bloom's taxonomy one more time.
Yep.
Thank you. So just keep in mind that like intro level and high level courses stress different levels of assessment. So like multiple choice, true, false, progressing up to essays, short answers, projects, presentations, and papers. So you usually work from the bottom of the pyramid up. Your formative assessments are usually lower on Bloom's, while summative assessments tend to be higher up. So you want to remember that formative assessments are for monitoring learning And they provide an opportunity for you and your students to see how well they're grasping the material before moving on to that summative assessment. While the summative assessments, usually more complex, require students to put multiple concepts together and allows you to sort of see the end result of, did they accomplish what you're hoping for them to get done in the course? So now that we've considered assessments, let's look at the last piece of this, the instructional materials that support the assessments. And I'm going to hand it back to Heidi for this part.
Hey, so now we're hitting that final piece of the puzzle, and this is one of the spots where a lot of times as an instructor you run into so many new things that are going on, and you want to share all those different resources. And the final piece of this puzzle in terms of the alignment, we're going to examine like how you can align course content and activities. And I'd like you to think about the material that you prepare each time. Like maybe you do run into new materials and you pass along that information. But are those materials always things that prepare the student to successfully pass the assessment that you've planned? And so the content is instructional material that aligns to the knowledge that students need to achieve those outcomes without distracting them with extraneous material. I love to nerd out like the next person does, and so supplemental materials are my jam at the end of the resources. But if they're in the resources, I get a lot of mixed messages as a student and a rabbit hole expert. So providing a mix of written instruction and multimedia components, um, along with interactive elements, ensures that you increase student engagement. Um, and when it's aligned to the content, um, and the actual objective, then I'm able to achieve, as a student, I'm able to achieve that a lot more quickly because those examples could really combined with text and images or animation along with the textbook bring a level of guidance and information that I wouldn't receive if I were just reading the textbook on my own. Um, so adding maybe like YouTubes and TED Talks, those are some other pieces of content and things that you could curate so students can um, find different voices and perspectives. Studies show that students do find instructor generated content, including your written resources, explanations, or samples and examples, and as well as interactive content and feedback, even when it's auto graded within the resources, to be very valuable to the learning process. Those tend to actually resonate, and because you're asking them to do a kinetic job, they actually lodge in the memory a lot more quickly, and they're a self-evaluative tool, so it helps solidify your the learning for the student. So your lecture material should differ depending on your specific learning objectives and which things are covered within each module. So it's common for instructors to choose their resources before developing learning objectives. However, setting up the learning objectives first does help to inform and help you to determine the best resources to include to help your students to meet the learning objectives. So, curating new content that aligns to the course outcomes and assessments directly, considering what types of instruction would best assist the student in achieving the module or learning objectives. So, for example, videos could help students visualize a process related technique, such as maybe a math equation or creating a chart. You might find it helpful to create or to locate videos that illustrate those processes rather than trying to explain it through text because it's a little more complex. Less complex concepts, you could easily just write a narrative text, a couple of paragraphs about that, add a couple of images that help to relate the student's knowledge to that new knowledge. textbooks are another resource, but they are kind of um, like an augmentation tool. We like to keep textbooks as a source of extra knowledge and in addition to your expertise. So like your voice is what the student really wants to hear. So I know that not all of you are going through the GDM or the a guided design process or developing a course, but I do like to mention here that the reviewer does look for different types of instructional materials in each module, and they kind of will spot check for different things to meet certain standards within the review process. So that's just a note for those who are developing courses, that this is something that the reviewer will look for. So um, one thing to keep in mind is that it should be appropriate. The content should also be not only relevant but appropriate to the level that the course is, and kind of chunked in a way to help students absorb those pieces of knowledge in terms of concepts. So topics within each other, subtopics. Thinking in like almost that hierarchy of an outline when you write out your narrative and when you curate your pieces, because there isn't a person with the students. You kind of want your voice to be there, so putting in little short videos with anecdotal examples that cover specific topics might be a really great way to incorporate your voice without it being a high stakes situation for students. So where they have to maybe meet you synchronously or something like that. We don't have time to go in depth into instructor presence, but one critical component of facilitating your course is maintaining that regular substantive interactions. And some of these videos, or even just in time videos that you might share within news and announcements when you see a trend in assessments, maybe an assessment gets turned in and most students missed the mark on something, and you just make a quick video about that. Those can definitely be part of increasing the regular substantive interactions that you have with your students. All right. So I want to kind of put everything all together now. Now that we've covered all the components and everything's mapped out on our alignment map here, we can look back at the completed module for our 1003 course, and we have the course outcome, we have module learning objectives, and if you look at the activities and assessments, you'll see we revised this section to establish both an aligned formative and summative assessment. And don't forget about the career skills that summative assessments allow your students to demonstrate. So drawing two-dimensional shapes in here. We added articles by Artie McArtson, um, not a true artist, just a fictional, but we wanted to put in where you might add all these different components. In this example, we would be asking students to demonstrate for this career skill, we'd be asking them to demonstrate the technical physical skill of or presentation skills and the critical evaluative skill, where they're going in, they're doing an interactive lesson, they're doing a studio practice assignment, they're drawing two-dimensional shapes in the real time in physical form. So your call to action, now that you've seen how this all works together, is to begin your own application activity, your homework, so to speak, is to take what you started in the workshop and flesh it out. We've already revised or written a course outcome and deconstructed it into learning objectives, or at least thought about them and rephrased them in a way that is a little more meaningful for us and also measurable. And the next activity is for you to think about the structure of your course, and determine if it's aligned. Plug in all your pieces that you currently have already curated, put them where they belong in terms of, are they an activity? Are they an assessment? Are they lecture materials that go under instructional materials? I want to emphasize that this activity can be done for like any course, regardless of modality. So it doesn't need to be restricted to an online course, but in this case, when you're thinking through this, you can really begin to visualize what the alignment looks like, and that each course outcome and learning objective are aligned to each component within the map itself. So once you've put it all together, when the course is properly aligned, the critical course components, outcomes, objectives, and so on work together to achieve the larger desired goal, the course outcomes. So you can determine alignment by thinking carefully about how each component of the instruction is related, as well as the activities. As an instructor, the objectives are specific and measurable and observable, and they're aligned to your assessments, which are supported by the relevant activities and your instructions and materials. So, um, if you're working on this is one little call out to developing. If you're working on developing a course with LSU Online, please be ready to discuss your alignment map when you meet with your designer. Additionally, in our email, we're going to include a link to some of the resources that we referenced, as well as some that we did not reference, that are just very helpful. You can also self-enroll in an examples in a sample course if you'd like. If you're not within the LSU A&M campus and you'd like to be enrolled in that course, please reach out to me individually in the follow-up email, and I can help with getting that taken care of for you as well. All right. One thing that we didn't get a chance to really dive into are the resources and support that faculty that are provided on the faculty website. When uh, when you search within the faculty support website, there's a huge hub of resources. So we have a lot to work with, and are a lot of just-in-time videos and different resources that you can use, not just for alignment, but for everything. So if you stumble and you are in the middle of your alignment map and you maybe need a little bit more info on other things, the Resource Hub is a great place to go. We also have Designers in Residence, which is a service that we as designers offer within a one-to-one consultation format. And that is also available on the Faculty Resource and Support website. So you just look up Designer in Residence and it should populate all of our names. And I believe it's it's by college. So if you just find your college, you'll be able to schedule with us. Um, and of course, while you're going through, if you run into tech support issues, you definitely excellent. Thanks, Shane. um, we love to hear that we're helpful. So, as you run into any kind of issues, we definitely recommend reaching out to the technology centers that are available, like Faculty Technology Center. And if you're at LSU, there is a specific information technology center that you can call. So they can help you begin to work in the course itself. So those are all resources that are available and they're listed on the faculty website if you need more help there. All right, last questions, final thoughts, solidified ideas. We'd love to hear any questions or concerns that you have in the chat, or you can unmute your mic. Thanks so much, Jane. And we'd love to hear your feedback as well. So I know I'm not a huge fan of QR codes, so and trying to do this during a presentation may not be your jam. But if you wouldn't mind doing this, I'll also include the survey in the follow-up email. So you don't have to try to do the survey right this minute. But while it is fresh in your mind, we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And this, along with the other resources, will be provided in the follow-up email. Did I provide a long enough time with the QR code. We may not I'm never fast enough with the QR code.
Don't worry, in the follow-up email, you'll also get a link to it as well.
Yeah. We appreciate you guys hanging in there and engaging with us today. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing your feedback. Thanks so much, Jill and Jane and Emily and okay, I don't want to say it wrong. Is it Fermini?
It's for men.
Fermin.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Thank you so much.
Right.
Thank you guys so much for joining. Oh, Quaja, very nice. Yeah, we love her. Um, so, all right. Well, we really want you guys to be fully informed. So I did want you to know that there's a resource page in the end of this presentation, which will also be shared. So we'll share all of these with you guys. Um, and if you have any questions about them, please just don't hesitate to reach out directly back to us.
I have a quick question before we
Yes,
kind of
sure.
leave.
I'm going to stop the recording if you don't mind.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Can the course